hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. The Dharma is vast and subtle. We now have a chance to hear it, study it, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Cloud Zendo. We're honored tonight to be with Jane Hirshfield. Thank you, Jane, for joining us tonight from your beautiful home, Zendo. Just a few words, and Jane, just tell me if any of this is out of date so we can update your bio. But from our website, we have Jane Hirshfield's most recent 9th poetry collection is Ledger. Is that right? Good. She's also the author of 2 now classic books of essays, 9 Gates, Entering the Mind of Poetry, and 10 Windows, How Great Poems Transform the World. And she has also co-translated and edited 4 books presenting the work of world poets of the past, including The Ink Dark Moon, which we did a program with some years ago, beautiful, holding the work of the 2 foremost women poets of Japan's classical era. Jane's poems have appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The Times Literary Supplement, Poetry, and 10 editions of the Best American Poetry. So Jane, thank you so much. You have many more accolades. And also I should add that you received lay ordination in Zen tradition in 1979. So thank you so much for being with us tonight and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you very much. Each of you who is here from Santa Fe or from wherever you might be listening. I'd like to dedicate this evening's talk to those suffering the events in Ukraine, to the circles of suffering emerging from there in every direction around the world, to all refugees, to all who hunger, to all who are homeless, to all who experience peril, to those who find in the face of these hardships community and courage, and to those who tremble, who weep, who despair, to those who are able to offer assistance, and to those who find themselves needing it, and to all who feel helpless. To the suffering bystanders, peace, and to the hearts of those whose own suffering causes this suffering, peace. Peace, the late Thich Nhat Hanh would say, is every step, not in every step. It is the stepping itself. But we can't always find that or feel that. This practice of Zen that we do, this invitation to mindfulness and meditation, to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, offers a gate of remembrance. It's a gate recognized by all who go through it as gateless, at every moment open. And yet, those moments when we stand outside it, we feel ourselves fumbling at what can seem a closed latch. When I was asked to give a title for this talk some months ago, I had no idea what it would be that I'd want to speak about. And I emailed back to Natalie, there are so many possible realms of being that I could go into, and received in reply, why don't we title it Realms of Being? Very good catch-all. And so the realms of being that I'll be talking about today are the ones that are currently uppermost in mind for us all. Hakuin said this very body is the body of the Buddha. We practice always in this body, in this moment, in this world. And so first in this moment, I'd like to summon the realm of compassion. Avalokitschvara, who is known in Chinese as Kuan Yin and in Japanese as Kannon, as I'm sure everyone listening knows, is the Bodhisattva of Compassion. The literal meaning of the Sanskrit name, the one who hears people's cries and comes. We who practice the Bodhisattva path here, now, in this time, in this world, have come of age into a world where more and more cries can be heard. When I was a child, there was the morning newspaper, there was the evening news on a small handful of television stations. Now we hear directly in people's own voices and bodies the cries of Odessa and Kiev, of Somalia and Kabul and Myanmar, of farmers in Kansas and of the indigenous people in the far north whose ice is melting, of miners in the Amazon who burn down the forests, and of the people who live in those forests that are burning. There is no human being on earth who does not feel hunger, experience the loss of a parent, a beloved, a child. A great loneliness also surrounds us. We hear the cries of birds and fishes vanishing, the recorded cries of birds that have vanished, the emptying reefs of coral. We hear the sounds of sirens and floodwaters and missiles. We ordinary humans did not evolve to know so many people's lives, to hear so many cries at once. The example and vow of the Bodhisattva helps us to bear it. Compassion, the belief in compassion, helps us bear the suffering of others and bear our own suffering. Compassion tells us that our fates are shared. And that recognition in itself raises further compassion. The more we recognize that suffering, the first noble truth, is indeed a shared, inescapable truth, the more we understand that our own suffering is not exceptional. Our own bewilderment and confusion are not exceptional. Our strengths too, our efforts and actions, they aren't exceptional either. We are not alone in either our griefs or our joys. And because this universally shared truth of suffering leads to the truth of suffering's causes, it becomes at once a guide also towards suffering's lessening. When we don't separate ourselves and our own fates from others, we know what to do. Even in non-doing, within compassion's awareness, our lives' directions are changed. Avalokiteshvara's name speaks of hearing, not seeing. This has, I think, meaning. We can close our eyes, but we cannot close our eyes or our hearts, which continue to beat in every circumstance until the moment they do not. Human beings do close their hearts, of course, and do turn away from what we hear. But when we do, we know it, we feel it as error. A heart that's functioning fully, even physiologically, is a heart that is permeable, able to be touched and to be changed by what touches it. It will respond to the life it is part of. It will race. It will stop for a moment in shock. To separate the heart from the feelings we call inhuman, even while knowing that to be inhuman is one part of how we humans can be. But for those who have taken the Bodhisattva vow, especially, we hear the cries of the world and move toward, close, not away. We offer our intimate awareness, coats, shoes, food, bedrooms. I'm a poet not least because I found I can think with poems when no other path is open. And poetry is needed most of all when I enter the realms of the unthinkable. When I am bewildered and baffled as I feel now, when I am fractured, broken, when incomprehension is all I can find in the face of this world and this life, poems offer me some different ladder of understanding and a life raft. A poem doesn't solve problems in practical ways, but a good one, the right poem for its moment, allows at least the ears and the heart to stay open, allows the eyes to keep opening into the day, into the next day, whatever they hold, allows me to say yes to existence, just as it is. There's a brief poem by the early 20th century Alexandrian Greek poet Cavafy that opens, "For some people, the day comes when they have to declare the great yes or the great no." When I first arrived at San Francisco Zen Center in 1974, one of the first things that I heard at a guest student tea was the suggestion that practice means a person should say yes to everything. These two things travel together in my mind. Here's the full Cavafy poem. It's only 8 lines, but for me, they were life. For some people, the day comes when they have to declare the great yes or the great no. It's clear at once who has the yes within them, and saying it, they go from honor to honor, strong in their convictions. The one who refuses does not repent. Asked again, they still say no. Yet that no, the right no, drags them down all their life. To say yes to everything is not a simple idea. In its face, the mind goes, but what about, what if? And the heart goes, no, not to this. To explore the practice of the great yes fully would be a separate talk of its own. And so I will say here only that Cavafy's poem and that guest student tea hour suggestion have become for me a lifelong koan. What would the great yes be, said this moment? These past days, as also for most of my life, I've been thinking with some words by the Irish poet William Butler Yeats, one of the world's great crafters of understanding at the intersection of larger events and private lives. I'd like to offer you the words that have kept coming back to me since February 24th, waking on what was also my birthday to a war. Some stanzas from Easter 1916, Yeats's poems of the Irish uprising, an uprising that did not that week succeed. It's a poem mourning the dead in all their complexity and sacrifice, written within a moment whose outcome was at that time unknowable, as the fate of those in Ukraine is unknowable today. You will recognize the poem's refrain. All changed, changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. You'll probably recognize also the poem's opening. I have met them at close of day, coming with vivid faces from counter or desk among gray 18th century houses. I have passed with a nod of the head or polite, meaningless words, or have lingered a while and said polite, meaningless words. This poem that begins with the life of ordinary social interaction and with ordinary social judgment before the rebellion goes on to ponder the costs and consequence of violence, even violence taking the side of a wanted self-determination. It's a poem that, even as it honors the dead, refuses to ignore the cost of their choice. Yeats describes it with these lines, beautiful and harrowing. Hearts with one purpose alone through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone to trouble the living stream. The horse that comes from the road, the rider, the birds that range from cloud to tumbling cloud, minute by minute they change. A shadow of cloud on the stream changes minute by minute. A horse hoof slides on the brim and a horse plashes within it. The long-legged moorhens dive and hens to moorcocks call. Minute to minute they live, the stones in the midst of it all. And the next and final stanza goes on. Too long a sacrifice can make a stone of the heart. Oh, when may it suffice? That is heaven's part. Our part to murmur name upon name as a mother names her child when sleep at last has come on limbs that had run wild. What is it but nightfall? But no, not night, but death. Was it needless death after all? For England may keep faith for all that is done and said. We know their dream, enough to know they dreamed and are dead. And what if excess of love bewildered them till they died? I write it out in a verse. MacDonough and McBride and Connolly and Peirce, now and in time to be, wherever green is worn, are changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born. Forgive me for not reading you the poem in its entirety. You will understand, I think, why these words and thoughts have been haunting me these past 3 weeks. Facts about the Easter Rebellion over a century ago. Of the 485 people killed, 260 were civilians, 143 were British military and police personnel, and 82 were Irish rebels, including 16 rebels executed for their roles in the rising. More than 2,600 people were wounded. Many of the civilians were killed or wounded by British artillery fire or were mistaken for rebels. Others were caught in the crossfire during firefights between the British and the rebels. The shelling and resulting fires left large parts of central Dublin in ruins. Opposition to the British reaction to the rising contributed to changes in public opinion and the move toward eventual Irish independence. So one thing I've been thinking about increasingly for some years now in poems and in life is tenderness. Perhaps tenderness is simply compassion traveling under another name. The poet Galway Connell once said something I find irresistible, that the secret title of every good poem might be tenderness. I've been thinking for many years about the way that the qualities of good poetry and the qualities of practice confirm one another. Yeats wasn't Buddhist. He took no Bodhisattva vow, but practice mind isn't confined to any special tradition or vocabulary. Yeats recognized the effects of separation and violence, and that even a person choosing separation for what feels a reason of justice, a country's independence from exploitation, will bear the cost of single-minded, single-sided purpose. Back to the poem. Hearts with one purpose alone, through summer and winter seem enchanted to a stone to trouble the living stream. The language is so beautiful, it almost distracts from the meaning, but poetry's allegiance, Yeats's allegiance, the Bodhisattva's allegiance, is to that living stream, to a world in which even persons set on killing will be recognized as beings whose mothers once murmured their names as they lay sleeping. And two, the poem contains what I have called, when teaching poetry, a window. It looks outward beyond its own subject, beyond even the human. It recognizes there's a world beyond our concerns. A shadow of cloud on the stream changes minute by minute. A horse hoof slides on the brim, and a horse splashes within it. The long-legged moorhens dive, and hens to moorcocks call. Minute to minute they live, the stones in the midst of all. What shock that stones return to the poem is, come upon amidst the living hens and moorcocks going on with their lives. Even more of a shock because we have within the tenderness of this description forgotten the Easter Rebellion, forgotten the stony heart. In opening us to the tenderness of life and stream, horse and cloud, Yeats reminds us of another way to be, reminds us that the gateless gate is right here, always open. Reminds us that we choose with our opening and closing eyes and minds that are always open ears. Hear, that we hear how to respond to the cries of the world, that it is a choice. One of my practices as a poet and person and reader has been to seek out such reminders. Formal practices' daily schedule is a reminder. Dharma talks and lectures are a reminder. At one point in this pandemic's first summer, I surprised myself by seeking out Sharon Salzberg's earliest talks on Vipassana practice, which are all now up as podcasts. I wanted the profoundly practical grounding that those beginners' lectures offered. But then also, especially since the election results of November 2016, I've sought other kinds of reminders. I've been reading almost entirely books by people who have lived through the darkest of times. The early 20th century Russian poets, Marina Tsvetaeva and Anna Akhmatova. I began rereading them around 7 p.m. that election night, understanding that the world as I'd hoped it to be was not, in fact, the world I lived in. Most recently, over the past few days, I've been rereading the Turkish poet Nazim Hikmet, who in the darkest circumstances of imprisonment, exile, ill health, never lost his love for the world. I've sought and found in them models for living, for writing, for witness, for continuing on. I've also, since I began to that night in 2016, questioned my own choices about how I spend my time, my attention, my awareness. I wanted in my reading to see how others had lived when the structures of public and communal life seismically shifted by war, by repression, in our own case, an election, but before that and after that, by other crises as well. The crises of justice, of Black Lives Matter, the crises of the biosphere, the crises of inequality and disregard, of greed, hate, and delusion. I've wanted also to look hard at these linked realms of public and private life, of interior experience, personal experience, and the cries of the world. So often to me these years, it feels as if I am seeing double and living double. All around me this evening is peace. In my garden, fruit trees are blossoming, spring birds are calling. My cat, luckily, is a poor hunter. I wake up every morning and see my local mountain, Mount Tam, and repeat as my first morning practice a phrase I learned when I went to Australia a few years ago, you beauty. You beauty is an exclamation, I was told, of happiness. It's not necessarily pointed at some specific you. Because I am so often sad, because I so often fear for the biosphere's future and all beings' future, it's tremendously useful me to remember every morning on waking just to take in my mountains, this moment beauty. To see first not my fears for the future or the present, but some quotient of radiance, even when it's hidden in fog, you beauty. That night in November 2016, when I began this more intense practice of questioning, I was about to lead a 3-day poetry retreat at a nearby ecumenical Catholic center, Santa Sabina. I knew that everything I'd planned to do with the group needed to change. As everyone coming, or maybe it would be almost everyone coming because it was a big group and you never know, would be feeling the shock of the election's outcome. I restructured the reading directions I restructured my own reading and craft talk to try to meet this world that seems suddenly, utterly changed. Though it was, of course, a world that had already existed. All of it had already existed. I just had not seen, or not seen clearly or enough inside my hope that something had changed. What is it to declare the great yes at such a moment? Even for those who are fully involved in what is usually referred to as engaged Buddhism or in any other engaged and activist spiritual practice, if you are practicing at all, the question arises, should I be doing more, living differently? What is right giving, right action, right speech? What is right silence, right concentration, right understanding, when the world's larger choices feel to you incomprehensibly awry? I would guess that even Greta Thunberg must ask herself this question she asks so strongly of others. Should I be doing anything differently? The earliest training periods at Tassajara took place at the height of the Vietnam War and its protesting. A story from that era has become iconic. One student during the question and answer period after one of Suzuki Roshi's lectures asked the question, how at such a time could people be sitting in a wilderness monastery and not in the city marching, joining the protests? As the story is told, Suzuki Roshi came down from his abbot's seat on the platform of that old stone zendo and beat John Steiner hard repeatedly with his stick. This now seems a shocking story. In American Zen, in most practice places, the stick, the kyosaku, has been mostly retired. This is, I will say, the only story like it that I've heard of Suzuki Roshi, although he would frequently confess that one of his weaknesses was anger, that it was problematic and something for him to work on. But if you study at all the old Zen stories, you know there's a fair bit of striking with sticks and fire pokers. If we only draw back in horror, we deprive ourselves of what it is they teach. In the story of the monastery and a war, in the paramita of action, the teaching is clear. To not believe that practice on the zafu addresses and lessens the suffering of all beings would be to turn your back on the Dharma. To think that only direct action, blunt action, loud action can change the world. That would be to cut ourselves off from the molecular and the mycorrhizal mats of connection and interconnection by which change equally occurs. If what in physics is called entanglement and spooky action at a distance are real, so is Thich Nhat Hanh's peace in every step. Even in a war zone, any step can declare peace. Even in a wilderness monastery, one breath taken in permeable open awakeness increases the world's stockpile of anti-missile possibility. I'm not sure now if in that 2016 election night of weighing my own life and my own choices, I remembered the story of my friend John at Tassajara. I do remember coming to some answer as I raised and re-raised a question that continues to this day. And so far, that same answer has held, though at any moment it can change. What I needed to do, I realized after some hours, was to continue doing what I already had been, only harder. To practice in the private silence of Zazen, and to speak in public, whether in poems or other words, within the Bodhisattva's vow of compassion, hearing the cries of the world. To remember tenderness when I find my own heart turning to stone. It's possible to hold discernment, determination, and tenderness in one's hands and life at the same time. Any of these without the others will be out of balance. I'd like now to speak of one other realm of being and of practice, the realm Suzuki Roshi called beginner's mind, and Sung Sanim called don't know mind. Keats, the poet, called it negative capability, the ability to abide in doubt and not knowing, grasping, becoming anxious. Sometimes my name for this is a simple, basic sense of humility. None of us can ever know what will happen in the next moment. Remembering that is another way to soften the heartstone. Another suggestion I heard very early after arriving at Zen Center when I was 21, you've already been hearing the evidence of, the suggestion that it's always useful to practice with a specific question in your mind. For many years, my question was, what is the emotional life of a Buddha? More recently, for many years, it's been what you've been hearing me talk about tonight. What can I, as a person of practice, as a poet, as a human being, bring to this very moment of shared fate? That's what I've been trying to investigate on my own, and because I knew I was speaking with you in printed sentences. It goes to the question of responsibility I think most of us gathered this evening must feel, watching this war at a distance, but watching also the continual violence of our own home lives and our own home streets, and watching also the diminishments of the natural world by which and in which and through which we live. We can't help but bring to that awareness the sense of meeting and question, the sense of shared fate, of interconnection. Looking for each moment's answer to that question, including that question in each moment's awareness, this helps me. No single or abstract answer will ever do. There's no ruler or scale that can hold the immeasurable changing complexity of our lives, and abstract answers are platitudinous and complacent. But to bring to this moment the question, what can I do? That is a question whose answering is infinite. That is a field for practice. Because I am sad for the world and its beings today, I'm going to close by giving you two very short poems, which I feel antidotes to sadness. One is my own, which I thought I should offer because some of you listening may have thought I'd be reading my own poems today. It's a small poem that comes from living where I do, inside what we in the American West now recognize as a climate change altered perennial fire zone. Vestment. For the pear, for the fig, no difference. They ripen even in ashfall. For the pear, for the fig, no difference. They ripen even in ashfall. The second poem is a haiku by the 19th century Japanese poet Issa. In this world, we walk on the roof of hell, gathering blossoms. In this world, we walk on the roof of hell, gathering blossoms. May all beings in every world realm find themselves now amidst blossoms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane, for that heartful and tender talk. We'll end with the 4 vows of the great Bodhisattva.